Born in a log cabin, self-taught lawyer, the man who would hold a divided nation together. Abraham Lincoln. He failed in business, lost elections, but he refused to quit and rose to lead a nation. When the nation split apart, he faced the greatest crisis in American history. He signed the Emancipation Proclamation, turning the war into a fight for freedom. But victory came at a cost. One final night at Ford's throne. One man, one nation, one impossible choice. When a country built on freedom was chained by slavery, one leader dared to break the chains, even if it meant breaking the nation itself. What makes a leader unforgettable? Is it power? Genius? Or the courage to act when the world trembles in silence? This is not just a story about a president. It's the story of a man born in a wooden cabin who carried a nation through its darkest storm and who changed the meaning of freedom forever. His name? Abraham Lincoln. And his legacy? The end of slavery in the United States. But the truth behind the legend is far more human, far more painful, and far more extraordinary than most people know. So stay with me, because this isn't just history. It's the story of how one man's moral struggle reshaped the soul of a nation. Before greatness, there was poverty. Before power, there was pain. To understand the man who freed millions, you must first know the boy who had nothing. The year was 1809. In a tiny log cabin in Kentucky, a baby boy cried his first cry. His family owned no land, no books, no comfort. But they owned hope and a belief in hard work. Young Abraham learned to read by candlelight, borrowing every book he could find. He split logs, plowed fields, and worked the riverboats, all while feeding an insatiable hunger to learn. He split logs, plowed fields, and worked the riverboats, all while feeding an insatiable hunger to learn. When his mother died, her final words were simple: "Be kind to everyone." Those words became his compass, guiding him through every trial that followed. Those words became his compass, guiding him through every trial that followed. You can't fight what you don't see, but once you see it, you can never forget. For young Lincoln, the face of slavery was no longer an idea. It was a wound carved into a nation's soul. As a teenager, Lincoln witnessed the cruelty of slavery firsthand. On a trip to New Orleans, he saw men and women sold like animals, whipped and branded. He said nothing, but he never forgot. He returned home, changed, haunted by injustice. He began to read about law, rights, and morality. And somewhere inside, a quiet fire began to burn. A belief that no human being should ever own another. That conviction would one day shape the fate of millions. Heroes aren't born. They are pushed by history. And sometimes, the man least eager for power becomes the one most fit to wield it. Lincoln entered politics almost by accident. He wasn't handsome, rich, or well-connected, but he had something rarer: integrity. People called him Honest Abe because he spoke truth even when it cost him votes. He believed slavery was morally wrong, yet he sought peace, not war. He hoped reason could heal what hatred had divided. But reason was dying, and anger was rising. By the late 1850s, the United States was no longer a country. It was a ticking bomb. A house divided cannot stand, but sometimes it must fall, to be rebuilt on stronger ground. When Lincoln ran for president in 1860, his victory was the final spark. The South saw him as a threat to their way of life, and seceded. 7 states formed their own nation before he even took office. As Lincoln rode to Washington, rumors of assassination followed him. He entered the White House not with triumph, but with dread. The Union was cracking. The dream of America, freedom for all, was on the edge of collapse. And the man from the cabin was about to face a storm greater than any president before or since. Every revolution begins with a shot. This one began at Fort Sumter. The cannons that fired that morning didn't just start a war, they split America's heart in two. April 12, 1861. The Civil War begins. Brother fights brother. A nation turns against itself. Lincoln's first goal wasn't freedom. It was survival. He told his cabinet, "My paramount object is to save the Union, not to save or destroy slavery." But as bodies piled up and blood stained the fields, Lincoln saw the truth. You cannot save a house built on injustice. The war for unity had to become a war for freedom. Sometimes the pen is mightier than the sword, because it writes history in blood and courage. In the darkest days of 1862, when defeat seemed certain, Lincoln made his boldest move yet. He drafted a document that would change America forever, the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that all enslaved people in rebel states shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. On January 1, 1863, he signed it, his hand trembling not from fear, but from the weight of history. The ink was barely dry when the words spread like fire. Freedom. Across the South, enslaved men and women fled plantations, risking their lives to join the Union lines. They fought not for politics, but for the promise of humanity. For them, Lincoln was not a distant president. He was the symbol of deliverance. When you stand for what's right, you stand alone. But sometimes, that's the only way the world ever moves forward. Not everyone celebrated Lincoln's decision. The South called him a dictator. Some Northerners said he was reckless. Others accused him of hypocrisy, freeing slaves in the South, but not in loyal states. But Lincoln's resolve never wavered. He said, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong." He understood that leadership isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about doing what must be done. He walked a narrow bridge between war and peace, politics and morality. And somehow, he didn't fall. Freedom proclaimed is not enough. Freedom secured, that's justice. To make emancipation permanent, Lincoln needed to write it into the nation's soul. The Emancipation Proclamation was a wartime measure. It could be undone once the guns fell silent. So Lincoln turned to the Constitution itself. He fought for the 13th Amendment, which would abolish slavery once and for all. It was his hardest battle, fought not with armies, but with words, persuasion, and politics. He lobbied Congress relentlessly. He appealed to conscience, traded favors, even risked his own credibility. And on January 31, 1865, the amendment passed. The chamber erupted in cheers. Men wept, women prayed, and Lincoln, in quiet relief, whispered, "The great task is done." Every victory demands a sacrifice. Lincoln's victory demanded his life. The war ended in April 1865. The Confederacy surrendered. The United States, battered, scarred, but alive, was whole again. Lincoln dreamed of rebuilding, of healing, of forgiveness. He spoke not of revenge, but reconciliation. With malice toward none, with charity for all. But fate had one final test. 5 days after victory, he went to the theater and never came out alive. An assassin's bullet pierced his head. The man who saved the Union fell before he could see it reborn. The next morning, Secretary Stanton whispered, "Now he belongs to the ages. Statues fade, words survive. But true legacy lives in hearts that remember why he fought." Lincoln's death didn't end his story. It immortalized it. He became the symbol of unity, of conscience, of human dignity. He proved that greatness isn't born from privilege, but from purpose.
Freedom wasn't his gift. It was his mission.
Behind the beard and the hat was a heart that bled for others. Abraham Lincoln's true power wasn't in his office. It was in his empathy. He showed us that leadership is not about commanding fear. It's about inspiring hope, that compassion can change laws, and that one person's courage can rewrite destiny. With malice toward none, with charity for all, let us strive to finish the work we are in. Abraham Lincoln.